All right. Hey, it's good to see everybody today. Welcome to our service, and welcome to all of you guys that are watching at home also. Hey, just have a couple of things to remind you of. We next weekend, we have a full kitchen food staff here. Indian Rocks Eats, and they obviously it's really one of those really cool things, since we have a school that feeds, over 1,100 kids a day all week. We have to have a full-time staff, right? And so the cool part is they can do stuff with them for us. And so next week they're going to have a brunch after this service, and you can, if you wanted to go down there, it's going to be some really, really cool stuff. And so you can either grab and go, or you can sit down and eat in there. But they wanted to start trying that once a month, and so next week is the 1st of October, so you can do that. Also, we every other year, we like to bring the supervisor of elections, right? We have him send somebody over, and so they're out in the lobby today. And so if you need to register to vote, they're out there today. I think that's pretty cool. We usually have them come 2 or 3 weeks, but we could only, this will be the only week they'll be out there. As I always like to tell you, I'm never going to tell you who to vote for, but I am going to tell you to vote. And so you can't vote unless you register. So you need to register, right? Unless you're not from here, and then you can't. So, but they're out there, and they would love to do that. Love for you to use them. So I'll have somebody, Tim, if you'll remind everybody at the end that he's out there. Also, too, last thing, if you have our app, this is really, I think it's really important. If you don't have our app and you feel like you're a part here, you are a part here, or you feel like this is your part here, then I really encourage you to get the app, the Indian Rocks app. Why? Because during like this coming up week, if we have to send messages that things are, and we only use the app messaging system for like this kind of stuff. It was really cool to have some of that app messaging stuff around COVID stuff that we had to say, hey, listen, we can't do this, or can do this, or whatever. But with the storm that's coming, and with some of the things Wednesday possibly being whatever, maybe we can do something, but we're not going to be able to have the food. Again, I have no idea what's going to happen. Nobody does. But if we'll put it up, we'll put it online and everything. But if you'd like to sign up for the app, there's a lot of all of the message notes are on that app every week, and so. But it gives us a great way to message you about closures or about things that are going to happen. So wanted to tell you about that. All right, good deal. If you have a Bible, go ahead and turn to Genesis 37. We're going to be a few minutes before we get there. I want to kind of get our minds back to where we were last week. We have been talking. We've been focusing on John chapter 15, and the title is just Abide, right? Of this series is just Abide. Jesus made this analogy, this metaphor, and it's kind of interesting. He basically was like a grapevine, right? And Jesus said that I am the vine, I'm the true vine, and my Father's the gardener, right? And you're the branches, right? You and I are the branches, and basically there's this thought. Jesus said, "Abide in me, and I in you, and through that you'll bear fruit." So you have then this analogy that the things that bear fruit are the things that grow out of your life. And so what you plug into will determine, in this analogy Jesus is putting in our minds here, is that the vine draws everything out of the soil that it needs, right? And then gives you everything you need in order to produce fruit. And you produce fruit according to what you're tapped into, right? What you're abiding in. And so you have this great picture, right? And so Jesus said, abide in me, I in you, and then you will bear fruit. And then Jesus makes this statement, for apart from me, you can't do anything. So we started talking about what it means to abide. And I really enjoyed sharing that. And I don't have a lot of time to share that with you today, but we talked 2 weeks, we talked about what does it mean to abide? And we looked at that. And then for the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about what is fruit. Number one is, it is the greatest evidence that you're a believer, that you're a follower of Christ. Why? Because Jesus said that you will bear fruit if you abide in me. So you have then this picture. And what is fruit? Fruit are producing things in your life that you don't have the ability to produce on your own. That's why Jesus said, without me, you can do nothing. So you have then again, what are these fruits? And these different fruits that are produced. Therefore, a tree is known by its fruit, vine's known by its fruit, whatever you want to say. So you have then this thought of that, an orange tree produces oranges, right? Because that's what it is. And Jesus said, if you're his, there are specific kind of fruit that you will bear because that's who you are. Not what you try to do, but who you are. So it's powerful stuff. We talked about love, joy, peace, some of them in Matthew 5. And then I decided to take a couple of weeks because it is that important. But I decided to take a couple of weeks to talk about the fruit of forgiveness. And so fruit of forgiveness, last week was part 1, and this week is part 2. I came up with that myself, right? And so, but I just want you to see, I want you to see that it is the fruit that is grown out of being his. This is a very powerful concept, but guys, it's also one of those hard things, tough things. And I want you to see that it becomes almost an impossible task, unless you are abiding. Because forgiveness in and of itself forgiveness is awesome to the one receiving it, but it is a tough concept for the one who's giving it. Because the higher the payment, the higher the debt, the more painful the forgiveness is. And so this is what I want to talk about. Now, first of all, before we get into this, and we'll share with you a little bit of what I talked about last week, but I wanted you to understand the term forgive. It is an accounting term. To forgive means to write somebody's debt off or to again, cleanse it, erase it, whatever you want to call it. So basically, if you owe a lot of money to someone and they forgive you, you don't owe them anymore. Right? You don't. That is the concept of forgiveness, right? Forgiveness, again, this is what I told you last week, and this is all still a little bit of a review, but I need you to hear this again. Forgiveness, the reason it is so difficult to hear really taught, is because by its very nature, forgiveness is not fair and it will never be fair. If you're looking for fair, forgiveness will never be a part of your life. Because in forgiveness, the very definition of the word, the very action is unfair. Because the person who pays the debt is the one who's been offended. I mean, tell me how that's even close to fair. So if you're looking for fair, then forgiveness won't be a part of your life. But I'll tell you this, it is the reason there's so many struggles, because forgiveness is such a needed thing. I tell you, it's mandatory for relationships, because forgiveness is necessary in any relationship that you have. Why? Because nobody's perfect, but you, right? All those other people you have to deal with, they aren't perfect like you. So if you don't have forgiveness in your life, you will be a very lonely person. That is just the way it works. It's the way it works. So we all know these things and see these things, but then why is it so difficult? Why is it so hard? Because you and I are living in this, because you deserve it, it's got to be fair type mentality, is that forgiveness doesn't have much room in those areas. I don't know, it's pretty powerful when you think of it. So this is and I talked to you about last week too, this will be the last thing I have to review kind of with you, is that there seems to be two types of people that struggle on this spectrum. It's those who have a hard time forgiving themselves, and then it's those who have a hard time forgiving others. And usually the two don't mix. Not always, but usually. Therefore, you're either the type person that blames yourself for everything, or you're the type person that blames everybody else for everything. And believe it or not, either one is just as destructive to you. It's an incredible thing. It is a destructive thing. Therefore, forgiveness enters into this huge picture, right? And but I can tell you this, that it all comes down to learning to live in the freedom that has already been bought for you. And what do those things mean? So I want to go ahead and jump right into it and let you see a couple of things and see some verses that we'll get to. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about this example. And a lot of the time I want to share with you is at the very end. So number one is just this simple thought of understanding God's forgiveness for you. You know, I think a lot of times people have a hard time with forgiveness because either they've never experienced God's forgiveness for them. Because let me tell you this, if you've experienced and live in the freedom that the forgiveness God has for you, then that should translate out to others. It just should, right? And why? Because you're His, because you're abiding in Him. I've told people before, one of the greatest ways to be like Christ is to forgive. I mean, I don't know that you're ever more like Christ than when that happens. But my goodness, it's not an easy one, all right? So 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 21. And I love doing this kind of stuff. I love just sharing what the scripture says and just let it speak, you know, because I grow very weary with people, well, that's what you think, or that's what the Presbyterian thinks, what the Baptist thinks, what the Catholic thinks. I don't care what any of them think. What I do care about is what does it say? This is why I got this board up here, because I'd like for you to see it, right? One of my biggest jobs, I think, one of my greatest passions is just letting you see it for what it says. Not what other people say it says, but what does it say, right? So let's just take a look at some of these. And the thought today is understanding God's forgiveness for you. Because it's huge. If you're His, right? If you're His. All right, here we go. For our sake, God made Him, Christ, to be sin who did not know sin. Therefore, He was not sinful. And yet He became the debt that was paid, right? That we owed is because what He's saying here. So that we might, right, become the righteousness of God. In other words, that just means being right with God. How is one right with God? I used to love to ask that question. I just ask it when anybody wants to get in a discussion with you. And I always ask, because it always tells me immediately what they're trusting in. I said, how is one right with God? That's the question I love to ask. And usually I get a litany of answers. Well, go to church, I was baptized when I was whatever age, or they start listening to all the stuff. And I want you to understand is that none of those things makes a person right with God. There's only one thing that makes a person right with God. There's only one thing that brings forgiveness into someone's life, and that's what Christ did for us. For our sake, He made Him to be sin who did not know any sin, that we might be right with God because of Him is basically the thought. Way back in Isaiah chapter 53, this was written, so I use these verses sometime on Easter, because Isaiah 53 is one of the great chapters that is prophetic in nature. It points to one who is coming, who's going to do something incredible. So these words here are written about 740 to 750 years before Christ was ever even born. It's amazing when you look at it. So let's look at it. Surely He has borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. So basically the thought is that there is one who is coming, right? In the Old Testament, and still to this day, our Jewish friends call this He, the Messiah. All right? The Greek word for Messiah is Christ. So that's where you get that from, right? So surely He is born, that is carried our griefs. They were not His, they were ours and our sorrows. And yet we esteemed Him stricken and smitten by God and afflicted. Look at this, but He was pierced for our transgressions. right? And he was crushed for our iniquities. So you have this substitutionary that is in our place, that has paid our debt that we couldn't pay ourselves. It's an incredible thing that it talks about. It goes on. And upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. See, we talk about the fruit of the Spirit being love, joy, peace. We talked about that a few weeks ago. What does it mean? People long for it. People look for it in our culture and around the world. Having some peace in here and not the chaos. How does that happen? Well, it was bought for you, right? And this is what it means if you abide. It's just an incredible when you begin to see it. I would love to stay here a lot longer, but we've talked a little bit about this, but I want us to move on. And by his wounds, all right, we are made whole or healed is the thought there. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And here we go. And the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. Right, so it talks about 700 years before Christ is born. It talks about one who is coming, who's going to do something, right? Who is going to pay a debt, who's going to sacrifice and all that goes with it. Now, I want to turn to some real, this again is all underneath understanding God's forgiveness. You know, so many times we talk about, I just say to you, God has forgiven you. And the question is, yeah, but how do I get that into my life? And what does that even mean? You see, the scriptures share all of these things and teach them, not just what they are, but how it happened and what it means to you. And that's what I want you to see. One of the most quoted verses is in Romans chapter 3, right? And it's usually just this verse that's quoted. And it says, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Now, I want you just to hear me. This is, when I was growing up, when I was a kid, I never met anyone who didn't realize that they were a sinner, right? I just never met anybody like that. But today, I mean, you live in a culture where people don't even think sin exists. It's incredible, right? And but the scriptures are very clear that everybody's in this boat, right? And it was the reason Christ came. And that you'll see here in the next verse, you'll see here that there is nothing that we can do to help ourselves. Therefore, we need forgiveness. If you pay the debt off yourself, then remember, then why did Christ even die? Right? Why would he even do what he did? Now, don't lose me here. Look at verse 24. So verse 23 was, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. Verse 24, look at this. And we're justified by his grace as a gift. Okay, a lot of words here. Let's just stop long enough to understand what they mean. What does the word justify mean? Well, you see the word just in there. Just, justice. Just, and justice. You hear a lot about that today. Believe it or not, it's an extremely hard term. It's a tough term. Justice is something, I want justice, I want justice. If you really wanted justice, you might not want it when you get it. And so, Jeff, what do you even mean about that? Well, justice is that which is right. But the problem is, you and I don't really need justice as much as we need grace. Let me tell you what I mean. Therefore, and I've used this illustration before, and I can't think of anything more effective. If justice was truly served, you would receive a punishment for every time you ever broke any law. Therefore, a good majority of you would be bankrupt, because if you got a speeding ticket for every time you sped, and if you had to pay that every time, now there's a handful of you in here. Oh, I'd never go over the speed limit. Okay, well, God bless you. But for the rest of us, all right, I could pick another area, right? I could pick another area for you. But understand, if you truly, I want justice. I tell you what, justice is a tough thing. It is a tough thing, right? And the word justify, I just want you to understand what it means. The word justify means to make something right that's not right. All right? Now, so when somebody justifies something, they usually They usually are they're usually wrong, but they're trying to make themselves right. You don't have to justify something that's already just, right? So this gives you some real, just understanding some of these like words that just come up in the Bible, and you're going, what is he talking about that? All right, so for all have sinned, therefore everybody needs to be justified, that is to be made right. Right? So you have in this picture that for all sin comes short of the glory of God, and they are justified by grace. Therefore, you can't earn it, you can't deserve it. Grace by its very nature means that it's a free gift. Therefore, there's no religious ritual you can do, there's no prayer you can chant. There is none of those things that makes a person right with God other than grace. It's a gift that you can only receive by faith, which you'll see in just a minute. So what I'm trying to talk about here, if you can deserve it, you can't call it grace. It's a powerful concept. If you truly understand, right, and this is what I'm wanting you to understand, is that you can understand God's forgiveness and what happened. Because when you understand it, it begins to fall into place a little bit better. Sometimes it's hard to accept. So we're justified by his grace, therefore we made right with him by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus. Here's a 50-cent word, all right? A redemption. What is redemption? Do you ever hear people talk about that? Okay. Well, the best way I can share is how it was used most of the time back in Jesus' time. The word redemption, you have to remember that if you were in financial debt, is that the person that you owed money, they had the legal right to put you in prison. It was called debtor's prison. And it was always a much bigger jail than the criminal prison, all right, if y'all know what I'm saying. And so they had the right, and you could be kept in prison until the debt was paid off. Now, that's why the bigger the debt, the more trouble you're in at that particular time. Now, so what would happen at times is that you could have a friend, or usually it was a family member, and they called them kinsman redeemers. That is, somebody in your family would come and pay your debt off. And then that would do what they would call, that would redeem you. Redemption. Therefore, in prison for your debt, but your debt's been paid, you've been redeemed. It was a powerful concept. We just don't use the word very much. People just think it's a religious word. But at Jesus' time, it wasn't a religious word. Everybody knew what it meant when they said it. Just kind of cool, right? Just kind of cool when you think about it, all right? All right, and verse 25. Whom God put forward as a propitiation by his blood, okay? This is not just a 50% word. This is a dollar word. All right, it's propitiation. What does it mean that God, it's a Jewish thing, but let me explain it to you. You know, when I was in school, this is a little eggheady, but when I was in school, they made us do papers, right? And my Greek paper was this word right here. Jeff did a 25-page paper on that word. Oh, and it's a real page turner. You'd love to read it. Let me give you the 30-second. Let me give you the 30-second definition, all right, of that paper. All right, it is a cool word. It is one that's rarely used in the Bible, only 3 times, and it basically, the noun form of it is the Old Testament. Boy, don't miss this. The mercy seat, which is the Ark of the Covenant. It is the place where mercy is obtained. Right? The place where mercy is obtained. And if you know anything about our Jewish friends and the Day of Atonement, it's the day to atone for those things, try to make them right. Well, how do you make it right? Well, there's a sacrifice, a lamb, which were all pictures of what Christ would do, which is what you get, what he's saying here, that what Christ did was the same picture of like the Day of Atonement. And it can only be received by faith, guys. Right? You can go all through the religious rituals. You know, you ask somebody, what is it that makes a person right with God? And they'll say something like joining a church or baptism or doing this or that. And guys, none of those things make a person right with God. None of them. There's only one thing that makes am right with God, and that's what Christ did for us. It is a powerful thing when you truly understand that, because it has nothing to do with being religious. It has everything to do with Christ paying your debt, right? And it's grace. It's a gift you don't deserve. Therefore, you can't earn or deserve it. But the greatest way you can show appreciation and bring him glory is just live in the freedom he's already bought for you. So few ever do. So few ever live in that type of freedom. Right? So there's propitiation that was to show God's righteousness. That is, God's going to be righteous. That is, he's going to do what's right. Right? And because in his divine forbearance, he had passed over sin. So it's more of a credit type system until Christ did what he did. So I'd love to talk more about that, but we've got to move on. Look at this. Verse 26. It was to show his righteousness at the present time. Now, this word righteousness is talked about a lot. What does that mean? You know, sometimes people use the word self-righteousness. That just means in and of yourself, you just think you're pretty awesome. All right, that's what self-righteousness is. But in the end, the scriptures don't teach that whatsoever. The Pharisees had that. But anyway, righteousness just means being right. Perfect. Righteous, right? Now, it was that as Jesus did what he did to show God's righteousness at the present time, so that, don't miss this is powerful stuff here, so that he might be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Christ. Now we've already talked about the words now. Okay, what does it mean, right, to be just and the justifier? Because the two don't seem compatible, right? Just and then that which is not just, but the process of making it just, right? So God had this because of love motivated him, right? For God so loved the world. He had this desire to make you right. That's how you can be a justifier, is that you're making the situation right. And so paid the debt himself. Why? Because God can't not. I've heard people say this through the years. I know a lot of people believe it because of the culture in which you live. But again, what is your truth based on? Is it based on what the scriptures teach, or just Dr. Fluffyhead down the street that's telling you this is the way he thinks it ought to be? I want you to hear this thought, is that if God could overlook, right, these things, right, then why doesn't he just overlook? Well, it's not a big deal, God's not going to punish anybody. And we're going to see that in just a minute. But remember, so that he might be just. That is, he's going to do what's right. Right? See, it's an interesting thing, and I'm getting a little bit off track here, but I just want you to see this. I want you to see the culture you live in. Because see, I grew up in a time where it was really, let's just use parenting. Parenting was extremely strict, right? That was pretty much everybody. You just were tough, right? But if you want to know the culture you're growing up in, right, if you're younger, then you're over here in what I call the ultra permissive, where we don't even tell anybody that they're wrong. Right? And when you grow up over here, you don't ever see, nor can a person understand what Christ did for them. Because you're constantly being told that no, there's no such thing as sin, there's no such thing as wrong, whatever. Therefore, if you don't see that, then you'll never see your need for Christ and what he came to do for you. It is an interesting thing when you see how these things work. But remember that God is going to be just. And it says here, he wanted to also, because out of love, is to be the justifier of the one who puts their faith and trust in him. It's an amazing thing when you see it, right? So that's what he did for us, right? That's what he did for us. And I do want to tell you, because I know there's a good group of you in here, that there's nothing spiritual about beating yourself up for your past sins, right? There's nothing spiritual about that. If you want to honor him today, then start living in the freedom that he has already bought for you. It's dishonoring to not live in the freedom, even though you don't deserve it. That's what I hear people say, well, I just don't deserve it. And I'm like, you're right. You don't deserve it. But that shouldn't keep you from living in the freedom. Why? Because he did what he did so you could be free. Galatians 5, right? It was for freedom that Christ has set us free. So the greatest way you can honor him is to live that way. Live free. It's a powerful thought. Right? Now I got to move on. Number 2 is forgiving others, right? Understanding God's forgiveness for us and then forgiving others. We'll have to go through this a little quick because I have an example I want you to see in just a minute. So what does this mean? All right, Matthew 5, blessed are the peacemakers, right? They'll be called the sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you when others revile, persecute you, and all manners of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great, right? Because they persecuted those before them. Look at Colossians 3:12. Put on then as God's chosen ones. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Put on then has this picture of this analogy of putting clothes on. Put on then, all right, as God's chosen ones, as I like to say, those of you that are his, right? Holy and beloved, that is who he's made you. So put on compassionate hearts, kindness, humility. We'll talk more about that next week. Meekness, patience. We've kind of talked about these before. And he goes on to say, bearing with one another. And if one has complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so must you forgive. So guys, I want you to understand that as a believer, it's not an option if you truly are his. If you're struggling, if you're still struggling, and if it's hard, then you're doing it right. Forgiveness should be one of the hardest things you ever do. If it doesn't bother you whatsoever, then the debt or the offense probably wasn't that bad, right? But I can tell you this, that it's an expectation, because that's why we talked about, have you truly understood God's forgiveness for you and what that means for you? If you truly get that, then forgiving others becomes possible, never easy, right? Unless you're one that, I have had people tell me, Jeff, I don't have trouble forgiving others. I just have trouble forgiving myself. That's why I went to you. There seems to be 2 types of people. But I don't know. If you truly understand what he's done in your life, then abiding in him is going to produce this fruit of forgiveness. Not only for yourself, we've already talked about that, but learning to forgive others. And I get what you're saying. Guys, when I really do this message right, it's going to make some people mad, because their natural response is, you don't have any idea what you're talking about. You don't understand. And I get it, guys. I've talked with people for years. But I'm telling you, it's the one thing, it seems to be the only key that lets you out of your own prison cell. And I know that sounds overly dramatic, but it is an incredible thing, right? I've just seen it too many times through the years, right? He goes on saying, above all these things, put on love. That's what binds everything together. We talked about that last week. Verse 15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts. Peace, we talked about that a few weeks ago. This world runs after peace. Some kind of a quietening of the chaos, right, that lives inside. But it is one of the fruits of those who abide in him. Peace. Not lack of problems, not lack of storms, but peace in the middle of the storm. That's where you hear some of the songs and other things and poetry and other things that talk about having peace in the middle of the storm. It is an amazing thing. All right, Ephesians 4:30. It says, don't grieve the Holy Spirit, by whom you've sealed for the day of redemption. That's another word that's not enough time to share right now. And look at verse 31. And boy, don't miss this one. Let all bitterness, wrath, anger, clamor, and slander put away with you with all malice. Now, what does that mean? Guys, I'm not saying everything, but most all of these things, right, have its foundations in unforgiveness, right? Because unforgiveness leads to hatred and leads to all bitterness and all kinds of rough stuff. And it's interesting that we live in a culture now, and I don't say that often, but I just like for you to see it, that forgiveness is almost weakness in our culture. I found that incredible. But all of these things that come flying out, these are all things that destroy most of the other relationships in your life, right? Let's just use this one, all right? Let me just give you a for instance. You got a jerk of a boss. And you say, a for instance? All right, just hang with me, all right? You got a jerk of a boss, right? Has done some unethical things, whatever. And just generally, not all are like that, but let's just use this as an illustration for you to understand what I'm talking about right here, right? And so it just gets to you day after day after day, right? And so some real rough feelings toward this person grows up into anger, right? Eventual hatred, right? Now, you go home, right? And I'm not saying this is right either. But you go home and, and the dog, gets in the way, and now you're yelling and screaming at your dog, right? When it has nothing to do with your dog. It has to do with your anger over here. I don't want to get too pop-sci on you, but remember this. A lot of times the people we love wind up bearing the brunt of the struggles that we have in other places. Shake your head if you know what I'm talking about. Right? So learning to live in forgiveness becomes a freedom not only for you, but for all the other things in your life. Relationships down the line. It is an incredible thing, right? An amazing thing. So how do you put all of these away from you? Well, the scripture talks about abiding. These are nothing but fruit from abiding in something else. It's interesting stuff. 42, be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another because you've been forgiven. It says it over and over and over and over again. All right, number 3, and we got to hurry on along. So this is what I really wanted to share with you today, and I shared everything up till now so that you can really get and understand this particular. Number 3 is just an example from the scriptures, one of the greatest examples of what it means. Okay, tracking with me? Number 3. There we go. It's an example of the fruit of forgiveness. And the greatest example in the scriptures is the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Not Joseph and Mary, but Joseph in the Old Testament. And it covers a full 13 chapters, Genesis 37 through Genesis 50. And there is no greater picture. And if you've been listening up to this point, we're going to kind of draw you into a real scenario that really makes you look at yourself. It's really cool how it works. So I always like to say this. If you hadn't been listening up till now, just go back to sleep. It's not going to matter to you. But if you've been hanging with me on this whole subject, then listen to what it says. Now, let me catch you up with it. Genesis 37:19 will be the verse. But an example of the fruit of forgiveness. And it's the story of Joseph. And if you know anything about the story of Joseph, if you've seen a movie or the Hollywood musical, not the Hollywood, the Broadway musical from it, there's a lot of different portrayals of Joseph's life. But Joseph was one of the sons of Jacob. Jacob, who was later named Israel. God renamed him Israel, and it's still the nation that's called by that name today. But Jacob had all these sons, which wound up being the 12 tribes of Israel. And Joseph was one of those sons. He was one of the younger ones. But he did what his dad wanted him to, and so his dad loved him, and the brothers hated him, right? And so there's a lot more to it than that. Guys, I think I have done 17-week series on the life of Joseph here. And there's just no way I can cover all of it. So I'm going to speed through a lot of it. I just want to get you to this one instance in his life, all right? And so basically, all of the brothers are out watching the sheep. And Jacob sends Joseph to go check on them. And as he's going out to check on them, this is where we pick up the story, all right? Genesis 37, verse 19, it says, they said to one another, here comes the dreamer. Right? Here comes the dreamer, this dreamer. Look at verse 20. Come now, let's kill him. You know, it just shows you have to progress pretty far down the road when your hatred turns to killing someone, right? You do realize that's where it all comes from, right? It's amazing. So basically, I said, let's kill him, and let's throw him into a pit, and we'll just say that an animal ate him, right? And then in verse 23, Joseph came down, and they stripped him of this robe, and if you know anything, he had this robe of many colors, as it's known. It's just a robe his dad had gotten him, so they hated the robe as much as they hated him. And so in verse 24, they took him, they threw him into a pit, and the pit was empty and didn't have any water in it. Verse 25, and they sat down to eat, and looking up, there was a caravan, right, of Ishmaelites coming by from Gilead, and they were on their way. They were bearing all these goods, and they were on their way to Egypt, right? Verse 26, and then Judah said to his brothers, hey, what is it going to profit us if we just kill him, right, and conceal his blood? Verse 27, let's just sell him. I mean, it is an unbelievable thing of what can come, what these things can do to what comes out of our mouth. You know, when you're living in these things, it clouds your judgment, you know? I mean, you catch yourself wind up saying things that you never thought you would, but that's what happens when it takes you down these roads, right? You know, it's like you can justify just about anything to yourself. Since I've already told you what that word justify, that is make something that's not right, right. And they're trying to make this, well, he deserved it. They're trying to come up, well, let's not kill him. Let's just sell him. And so they sold him, right? After all, he is our brother, right? Kind of like that. Again, that's the kind of stuff, right? And so basically verse 28, the Midianite traders passed by and they drew Joseph up and they sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Now, 60 seconds, and I'm not going to have time to develop this, but I've shared this through the years. You have this remarkable parallel picture to Christ and who he is and what he came to do in Joseph's life. You got a kid who was betrayed for 20 pieces of silver. Jesus was betrayed 30 pieces of silver. And that this betrayal led to all kinds of things, but in the end, both of these, Joseph, Jesus, became the salvation or savior of their own family. So all this is just an incredible picture in Joseph's life of who Christ is and what he was going to do. Now, I can't stay anymore there, but I couldn't pass it up either, all right? So anyway, so you have then this picture of that he went to Egypt. Now, when he got to Egypt, he was sold on the slave block. He was sold to a man by the name of Potiphar. Now, Potiphar was the captain of Pharaoh's guard, which means he had an extremely high-level position and extremely trusted. And so he bought him and he put him to work, and Joseph just worked hard, and he worked his way up to where he was the top servant. And eventually Potiphar's wife seduced him. He refused. She accused him of rape, and so he was thrown into prison. And this went on in Joseph's life from the time he was 17, that's when he was sold into slavery, until he was 30 years old. Everything just kept falling apart, right? But let me tell you what, as all these struggles were happening, any kind of a grudge and hatred, you nurse it for that long, it turns into all kinds of stuff. Joseph is just one of those incredible guys in the scriptures that, I don't know how it happened, but what happened, but I mean, you talking about hopelessness? You talking about Joseph probably went through so many things. Why? Because, well, how long do you think you're going to be in prison if you're accused of raping a high official's wife and you're a servant? As far as he was concerned, I mean, he's done. You know, even if they let him live, if that even happens, he's never getting out. And in fact, there's a whole series of situations, and if you know the story, and I don't have time to share it, but God set up a situation to where it put Pharaoh, who was the most powerful man in the world, dependent on Joseph about dreams and other things, and basically talked to him about that there's going to be 7 years of plenty, 7 years of famine, and you need to prepare. And so all those things happen. And so Joseph was gotten out of prison, and he was elevated to the second in command of the most powerful nation of his time. And so when the famine came and the whole world ran out of food, that's why that was the reason there was so much wealth in Egypt. I mean, a place that's 90% desert, how in the world did they get all that wealth? And well, if you're the only one with food, right, for 7 years, you see how. And so Joseph started basically feeding folks, and a whole lot of wealth came into Egypt. Well, eventually his family ran out of food, and they came to Egypt to buy food. And just so happens that Joseph's brothers are brought before Joseph. And they don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And then there's this whole situation of how he tests them different things. But then eventually, he couldn't handle it anymore. Joseph couldn't. And this is where we pick up in chapter 45, verse 1. He says this. And Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him, and he cried, I want everyone out of here. So that no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And verse 2, and he wept. He wept aloud. In fact, it was so loud the Egyptians heard it. And Pharaoh's household heard about it. And then in verse 3, Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. I know you're safe. I am Joseph, right? Is my father still alive? But I want y'all to think about the emotion of this situation, right? Look at this. All right, but his brothers could not answer him. I bet. And they were dismayed in his presence. They were freaking out. Now, I want you to understand something. Imagine being in front of the one that you had wronged so terribly, and that he was in such an elevated position that he had the power of judgment over you. And that was the situation these brothers were in. Right? In fact, it'll be a question I will ask you again at the very end. Imagine the person or persons in your life who have treated you the worst, right? Who have betrayed, whatever, just like this situation. It may never happen, but say that it does, that one day they stand before you and you have the power of judgment over the life, over what's going to happen. What will you do? The vengeance movies of our day, we'd all be disappointed if they just forgave each other in the end, right? But I'm here to tell you that just puts your own handcuffs on. It's an incredible thing how it works. But that is the situation that happened. They couldn't answer him, right? So Joseph said to his brothers, I want you to come near to me, right? And they came near, and he said, I'm your brother Joseph, whom you sold to Egypt. Now listen what he says to them. Don't be distressed or angry with yourself. Are you kidding? Right? If it was me, I'd say, you need to be upset with yourself. In fact, you better show a little upset, right? But he says, don't be angry, all right, with yourselves because you sold me here. For God sent me here ahead of you to save your life, preserve your life. So actually save the life of the ones who actually betrayed him becomes this really amazing picture. And he kissed all of his brothers and he wept with them, right? And after that, they talked. And when the report heard at Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come, it pleased Pharaoh. I mean, Pharaoh was probably looking for any way to keep Joseph happy and to reward him. And he finds out this long-lost family shows up. So what do you think Pharaoh's going to do? Well, he said to Joseph in verse 17, hey, I want you to tell your brothers and do this, and load all of your animals and go back to Canaan, right? And get your father and your households, and I want you to come to me, right? And I'm going to give you the best of the land, and you shall eat the fat of the land. Basically, these guys are treated like royalty because of Joseph. Question, did they deserve to be treated like royalty? No. But they were because of Joseph. And hence you have this great picture. This great picture. You know, Joseph didn't say, no, they don't deserve to be treated like this. Okay, they can stay alive, but I want bread and water, I want them way over here. You understand, they need to pay for what they've done. No, Joseph had already paid for it. Gosh, if you have ears to hear, it is a powerful thing to think about. And forgiveness is a powerful thing, especially to the one being forgiven, right? I mean, it's the difference in life and death. It's the difference in all kinds of things, right? It's all because of Joseph, right? So he goes on to tell him, hey, listen, look, chapter 50, skip down to 50. I'm running out of time fast. So basically, Jacob died, and they struggled. These brothers did. So Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, and they said, hey, it may be that Joseph will hate us. Well, because that's what unforgiveness leads to. Maybe he's going to hate us and pay us back. Maybe he was just waiting for dad to die, and then he's going to zap it to us. Well, because that's probably how they thought, what they would do, right? And basically, they concocted this lie, right? Manipulation really is what it is. So they sent a message to Joseph saying, your father left word before he died. Okay, that was a lie. And here he says, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And now please forgive their transgression. Sister says it again. God the Father. And so Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And basically his brothers, they'd already freaked out by now. You know, they'd worked themselves up into a tizzy, right? And look at verse 18. His brothers came and fell down before him and, we're your servants, you know, and Joseph said to them, listen, don't be afraid here, right? Fear totally overtook him, right? For I'm in the place of God. For am I in the place of God? He said, well, what you meant was evil, but God used it for good. There's a lot to be said there too. And basically the purpose was that many people would be saved, right? So don't fear. I'm going to take care of you. So he comforted them. Listen, you know, it's one of those pictures that if you are forgiven, there's nothing that thrills the person that really does the forgiveness. If they truly forgive you, then living in the freedom of what that forgiveness brings. And these brothers began to doubt it. And fear creeped in, doubt creeped in, and then they freaked out. If you have ears to hear, but I can't, I've got to be done. A couple things I got to throw at you here. It's named some things to learn. I can't really talk about them because we're out of time, but I want you to write them down if some of you are interested. Number one, Joseph knew what pain and hurt were all about. Guys, most of the folks in the room, right? Most of the folks in the room have had struggles, betrayals, right? And Joseph got it. That's what makes this story so cool. Number two, he had good reason not to forgive. Guys, you can give me all the excuses in the world. I get it. And they're not excuses, they're reasons. Jeff, you don't understand. I know I don't understand. But the one thing I do is it continues to haunt you. And freedom from it is what Jesus died for. It's incredible if you see it. Number three, Joseph kept his life open and clean so God could work. Number four, Joseph was free to overcome, right? All right, number five, Joseph's forgiveness kept him from making bad decisions. I cannot tell you that how these things can cause one bad decision after the next when you get on the roads. Forgiveness frees you in your relationships. I've already talked about that. Number seven, God can use that forgiveness as a testimony to the world around you. It's a powerful, powerful thing to think about. So as I close, it all comes back to, of who he is and who he's called us to be. So how does one learn to be able to have the ability? Jeff, I don't think I can do that. I do get that. That comes right from abiding, because the fruit is grown out of your life, right? And so that's what the cool thing about this Abide series is. All right, let me have a word of prayer with us, and I think we'll close. Lord, thank you for a great day. God, thank you for this message that has to do with the greatest gift that was ever given when you gave us your son. Lord, I pray that these words will penetrate our hearts in understanding who you've called us to be, but also more important than that, the freedom that you want us to live in, the freedom that was bought for us and paid for. And so, God, I pray for the people in this room, Lord, that we understand those things. If anything good has happened today, Lord, we know it's because of you. And Lord, we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. God bless you guys.